So in analytical psychology, there's something that we call the shadow. It's a complex, and it develops as we grow up from childhood into adulthood. And it can be a very challenging thing to deal with and overcome. In fact, you might argue that we never really overcome it, but we got to deal with it one way or the other. So then what is it? How does it manifest? What do we do about it? That's what we're going to talk about today. So before I get into this, I need to let you know about my sponsors. I'm just kidding, I don't have any sponsors. The shadow complex is different from the shadow image, okay? So I want to start off with that. Because a lot of times when you're talking about psychology, those two terms are interchanged, and they oftentimes, it's not clear which one is being referred to. Well, are we talking about the complex, or are we talking about the image of the complex? Those are two different things. So a complex is a tightly interconnected set of ideas, emotionally charged around a common theme of some kind. There's a lot of different ones, and we'll talk about more of them as we go, if people are interested. But the shadow is the one that's concerned with who you are as a person. So as we grow up, we develop this in ego, which is the sense of who I am. And as that develops, there's another thing that develops along with it, and that's what we call the shadow. Now, Jung called it the shadow because it's everything that falls outside the light of consciousness. So it's whatever we don't want to be associated with that falls into this shadow complex. So how does that manifest then? Well, one is in the image of the shadow. Okay, so oftentimes in Jungian theory or analytical psychology, you might see people talking about the ego versus the shadow, and how you see this in folklore. We had a video about superheroes. That's this very common theme in superhero stories, where the superhero has to face the villain, who is the opposite of the hero. That's a trope that's repeated over and over. And this, I think, is why. It's because within every person, you have who you think you want to be and who you aspire to be. So that would be imaged as the hero. And then there's all of the stuff that you'd really rather not be associated with. Even though there are feelings you may actually have, you find them unacceptable. So you kind of shove them into the darkness. I do have to apologize. My voice is not what it should be right now. I'm kind of fighting off of a cold, but anyway. So, in imaginative literature, in dreams, in active imagination exercises, this character will pop up. In someone who is strongly associated with being strong and brave, for example, then they may wind up, if they're extremely identifying with that, they may end up with a character who is an enemy, who's attacking them constantly, who can't be killed, for example. That's one example that I've seen in therapy before. Others are kind of spineless and cowardly characters that just aggravate the dreamer, stuff like that. Okay, so that's the difference between the complex, which is a collection of ideas and emotions, and the image of that complex, which is what you see the psyche doing when you're dreaming about this interplay in the psyche. So what creates this? Well, I want to give an example of the Freudian way of looking at this, and then we'll see how Jung kind of built on that and moved on a little bit and expanded the idea. So in the Freudian psychology, you have the idea of the id and the ego and the superego. Right? So there's these three parts of the psyche. The id is the drive, this basic primal drives, like sex drive, anger, impulses, just striving for I want. That's the id. And then the superego is this thing that develops as we grow up, as a bunch of ideas that we get from our culture about you're not supposed to do this and you're not supposed to do that and blah, blah, blah. So that's the kind of cultural collection of ideas that gets developed into this idea of a superego. And the ego's kind of stuck in between the id and the superego, and trying to manage the two. Well, I want this, but society says that, so how am I going to figure this out? Right? Now you can go a long way in looking at it that way, and helping you to kind of balance these two forces out. And sometimes it really clarifies things when you frame it like that. But there's some nuances here, though, and one of them is that if you frame the superego as coming from entirely without, as only societal, you miss a very important dimension to this, and that is that oftentimes what gets labeled as superego is not really coming from outside. It's still coming from inside. It's still coming from inner judgments of oneself. And so there is that you have to kind of deal with. And so I think it's really, you can simplify it even more by just saying there's the ego and the shadow. And the ego is everything that I'm trying to be. It's guided by that principle, whereas the shadow is everything that I'd really rather not be associated with, but it's still kind of part of who I am anyway. Now, looking at it like that is advanced already. Most people don't get to that point until they've either had to grow and change in life, or they've had to encounter this stuff in therapy. Because they will very strongly, many of us will have this desire to disavow any sort of feelings that we have that we might label as negative or bad or wrong. The fact is that we still have these feelings, and how we deal with it is kind of where all the action is. So how might this complex manifest itself? Well, you can see it in strongly emotional outbursts. So, and it's anytime that you find yourself kind of overwhelmed by emotion, you want to ask yourself, is this from the shadow rather than the ego? Is this coming from a place of really strong defensive reactions or negative judgments? Because that's all shadow material, typically. And it circles around the idea of self-worth. Because the ego is built on what do I value, what do I think is important to be, and the shadow is surrounding all of that other stuff, right? So everything you shouldn't be and everything you shouldn't do. If you don't ever have any impulses that you might consider wrong or bad, then you're not going to have much of a shadow. You might not be able to function in society either. But human beings are social animals, so we're very strongly motivated by social factors. And so acceptance, wanting to feel like people value us, is just as strong as I want food and I want sex and I want blah, 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 all of that stuff. These are all very strong motivating factors in the psyche. So the way it would manifest then would be anytime you find yourself overwhelmed with emotion, and Jung would in particular like to focus on the fact that shadow elements get projected onto other people. So a person who is terrified of feeling vulnerable may find himself disdainful and even angry at people who are vulnerable. He might find them, just kind of treat them poorly, mainly because he's so strongly against the idea of feeling vulnerable that when he sees it out there, he projects his anger onto them. Okay, so that's classic. In fact, there's a famous quote by Jung saying, whatever it is that you find yourself irritated by other people, you might want to look inside and see if that's something that you have that you're fighting against. I'm paraphrasing. I think he said it more eloquently than that, but that's basically the idea. So what do you do about it? What do you do about this conflict? You find yourself fighting against this inner sense of low self-worth, for example. Well, as children and adolescents, we defend ourselves from these negative judgments by brute force, or we basically just deny. It's not me, it's not who I am, forget that. That'll get you a certain distance in the world. But the fact is if you are afraid, say, if we're using our example of the person who's terrified of feeling vulnerable, if you are afraid, what are you supposed to do with that if the fear is coming from a sense of maybe I'm vulnerable, I might be criticized or attacked, and you've already set up this idea in your mind that that's just not acceptable and I'm invulnerable and I'm perfect and all that stuff, well, you're going to have big problems. So anytime those emotions come up, you're going to have an intense inner conflict. So what you do about that is it takes a lot of work, because you have to first of all accept the flaws and the fears and even the angry impulses or the unfair things that you might think about yourself or about other people, and recognize that, Mel, I can't just say that ain't me, that's the dude over there. You have to kind of accept that those are coming from within. Now, one thing I see oftentimes is people saying, well, I was always told that I'm no good, that I'm a sack of trash, I'm worthless. So my question then is, okay, but what do you do with that? Because those are other people's judgments of you. At some point or another, we all have to look at that and go, but do I really think that or not? The whole world might be against you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. You have to judge that for yourself, and you have to do it as honestly as you can. That's not an easy thing to do. Now, being that we are social animals, hopefully we're placed in environments where we're not constantly criticized. But I have seen that happen in some cases, and it's very hard on people. They accept and internalize those values, and that sets up a monstrous shadow within them that is everything they hate, and yet they can't escape it because it's a part of who they are. Very, very difficult. But the trick to that, though, is to recognize the external origin of those negative judgments. What if, for example, you grew up in an environment where everyone expected you to be perfect, and if you weren't, then you were heavily criticized or even punished? Unfortunately, I've seen what that does to people. It's very hard on them. But what do you do with that? Right? How do you get that? Well, the way that you approach it is slowly and with compassion, but recognizing that it's human nature to internalize those negative values of oneself. And then you have to question them, maybe for the first time in your life. Ask yourself, okay, I've been told this, but is it accurate? That means if we're going to ask that question, it means we have to actually figure out, what is a good person? What does a good person do? If you don't know, then you can't answer that question. And then you're stuck feeling like crap. So once you do attack that and you define it, then you have to set yourself up for the hard work of living up to that standard. And it oftentimes helps to have someone bounce these ideas. This is why therapy can be very useful. Not necessarily required, but you do tend to need someone to bounce these ideas off of, because it's very hard to do this stuff on your own. So in the end, the idea of integrating the shadow is not so much that you achieve it and it's like, ding, ding, I have achieved the integration of my shadow. No, it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process of inner reflection and balancing out what you like about yourself and what you don't. And if you don't like something about yourself, ask yourself why. Is it because of something that's outside of my control, what I was told, outside circumstances? If it's because of that, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. You have to accept it. If, on the other hand, it's because you've internalized a negative judgment about yourself from others, then now it's time to really examine it and to see if you want to change it, because you have that power to do that. In this life, we don't have a huge amount of power to change things that we don't like. Mainly it's kind of what we judge about ourselves, what we think is right and wrong, and not a whole lot else beyond that. There's so much out there that's beyond what we can do about. But that we can do something about. We can look at those maybe more primitive or primal urges or impulses that we have and ask ourselves, do I want to act on this or not? And if I don't, I have to accept the fact that I may have those feelings. I may want to lash out at my coworkers, for example. I may want to lash out at my spouse because they said something that made me feel, inferior or triggered a memory or whatever it is. If you do want to, well, then you go ahead and do it. But you got to, as long as you know the consequences. But most of the time, people don't want to do those things. They want to try to temper it. And that's where the work comes from. That's where the work comes in at, I'm looking at this side of myself, this shadow, and I can't get rid of it. I can't kick it out of my head. I have to understand it. I have to accept that it's there, but engage in a dialogue with it. And this is what I see in dream content of people working on shadow issues. When they're in the midst of a conflict like this, then they may end up in a battle with a shadowy figure or a character who embodies the things that they don't want to be. But the battle can just go on and on and on. They can beat the crap out of each other for years and never accomplish anything because the battle is a type of interaction that is not necessarily going to get them anywhere. If I'm just punching at it, I don't understand anything about it. I'm just attacking it. On the other hand, if I try to look at it from that other character's point of view, I might understand something more about it. And the two characters then, the ego and the shadow, can come together on a certain level. Maybe not ever reconciling entirely, but come to an understanding. Thanks for watching.